I know creators who have published hundreds, even thousands of podcast episodes, and they still don't have much of a business to show for it. I also know creators who have produced far less content, and yet they've built companies worth millions of dollars. So, what's the difference? Well, it isn't talent, and it isn't luck, and it isn't simply creating more content. It's what they built while they were creating that content. Now, today I want to share what I believe is one of the biggest mistakes that creator businesses make and how you can avoid it. Welcome to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm Gordon Firemark, entertainment attorney, educator, and known as the podcast lawyer. This is actually the third in a series of 3 of the creator business series I've been making lately. Over the past couple of episodes, we've started looking at podcasting and really the entire creator economy from a bit of a different perspective, not just as content, not just as marketing, but as a business built around intellectual property, brands, audiences, and more. In episode 197, I suggested that your podcast is probably more valuable than you think, not because of the episodes themselves, but because of everything those episodes create. Your reputation, your authority, your relationships, your intellectual property, your audience, and your brand. Those are all business assets that you can sort of take to the bank. Then in episode 198, we talked about when a podcast becomes a business, and the answer may have surprised a lot of people. Usually, long before you think it has, it becomes a business. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly become a business owner. It happens gradually, one opportunity, one relationship, one revenue stream, one responsibility at a time. So today I want to take the next step because recognizing that you're building a business is only the beginning. The next question is your business growing as quickly as your content? Because after more than 30 years representing creators, entrepreneurs, producers, authors, filmmakers, podcasters, media companies, you name it, I've noticed something. The biggest legal and business problems almost never happen because somebody created too much content. They happen because the success of that content exposes weaknesses in the businesses behind them. Now, I've seen ownership disputes, trademark conflicts, licensing opportunities that couldn't move forward because nobody had secured necessary rights, partnerships that fell apart, businesses that become incredibly successful, only to discover that the legal and business foundation underneath hadn't kept pace. The content wasn't the problem. The business simply hadn't matured alongside it. And that's what I want to talk about today. Every platform encourages us to think the same way. Publish more, upload more, post more, stay consistent, feed the algorithm. Now, don't misunderstand me. Consistency does matter. I've built a career around showing up consistently. My entertainment law update podcast has been going every single month like clockwork since 2009. In fact, we just recorded another episode today. And Legit Podcast Pro, this show, we are approaching our 200th episode. I believe in creating consistently. But I also think creators can become trapped on what I call the content treadmill. There's always another episode to record, another video to edit, another newsletter to write, another social media post to publish. And the work never ends, and it kind of keeps growing and expanding. And if we're not careful, we begin measuring our progress by that output. How many episodes did I publish this month? How many videos did I upload? How many shorts did I create? Those are useful metrics, but they're incomplete. They're more valuable to the platforms than they really are to us. Because there's another question we really should be asking. How is this making my business stronger? And that is a very different question. Every piece of content should do more than just fill your publishing calendar. It should strengthen something inside your business. Maybe it's your reputation that it strengthens. Maybe it demonstrates your expertise. Maybe it builds trust with your audience or introduces you to someone who eventually becomes a client or a partner or an investor. Maybe it becomes the foundation for a workshop or a course or a book or some kind of a licensing opportunity. Point is, content should be doing more than just getting attention. It should be helping build a stronger business. I didn't fully appreciate all that when I started podcasting back in 2009 when Tamara Bennett and I launched our show Entertainment Law Update. The goal was simple. Have interesting conversations about entertainment law. Share them with people who cared about the industry. That was basically it. No grand business plan. In fact, we tried monetizing a couple different ways with with continuing education credit, with some sponsors and things. But we really didn't have an elaborate content strategy or a vision of building it out as an ecosystem. That just sort of happened. We wanted to create something useful, and we did, and it worked out nicely. But over time, what's interesting is what happened. People started recognizing me and her because of our podcast. Conference organizers invited me to speak. Schools invited me to teach. Listeners became clients. The podcast led to books. The books led to courses. The courses led to legal templates. You see where I'm going? The relationships I developed through the podcast opened doors I never would have imagined when we first made those first episodes. Now, looking back now, I can see that every episode was doing more than just educating or entertaining an audience. Each one was strengthening the business behind it. It wasn't just creating content. I was building business assets, not all at once. It was one episode at a time. And that's how I realized something. The podcast isn't the business. It became one of the engines that powered my business. Now, that's a very different way of looking at your content, isn't it? And it's one I hope you'll begin adapting and adopting in your own creator business. So what does a healthy creator business actually look like? I think it helps to picture three interconnected parts. First up is the content. That's the visible part. Your podcast, your YouTube channel, your newsletter, your blog, live streams, courses. That's what people discover. It's what attracts attention. The second component is the audience. This is where something important happens. Content earns attention, but over time, if you're doing it right, attention evolves into trust. Trust becomes a relationships, more than one relationship, and relationships become community. Community creates opportunity, and that's when you get customers. That's why I don't get nearly as excited about download numbers as many people do. Downloads are nice, views are nice, subscribers, absolutely nice, but what really matters is whether those people begin to know you, trust you, like you, and recommend you, and eventually choose to do business with you themselves. That's when content starts becoming something much more valuable. Now, the third component to a healthy business is the assets themselves, the things that your content and your audience create over time. Your reputation, your intellectual property library, your brand, your customer relationships, your contracts and systems and goodwill and those licensing opportunities, your recurring revenue. All of these are the assets that give your business real value. And here's the important thing. These three components should grow together. Content attracts an audience. The audience creates opportunity. The opportunities become business assets. Those assets make the next piece of content even more valuable. And it's a cycle, a snowball, if you will. A healthy creator business keeps strengthening each part of that cycle along the way. Now, unfortunately, that's not always what happens. Sometimes the content grows, the audience grows, the opportunity grows, but the business underneath never catches up. Maybe it wasn't prepared for the success in the start. And that's when the problems really begin. So I want to tell you about one of those situations. Years ago, I represented the founder of a very successful podcast. He created the show, multiple shows actually, and he owned the network where this particular show was distributed. Over the years, several co-hosts rotated in, came and went, until one emerged as sort of the main co-host. And together, they built something remarkable. The audience kept growing, the show's reputation grew, people really loved it. And then they reached a point that every creator really hopes to reach, and that is that they started talking seriously about monetizing the show. Well, that's when everything unraveled. Not because anyone suddenly became dishonest, not because the podcast wasn't successful, but because success had exposed a problem neither of them had addressed. They had never clearly established the nature of the business relationship between them. The founder viewed the show one way, as his, and the co-host viewed it as another, his. Each believed something different about what they'd built together. Those assumptions had never mattered while they were simply creating the content. But once there was money in the equation, real opportunity, and a valuable business, those assumptions collided. The founder tried to preserve the relationship. He compromised. Unfortunately, that didn't resolve the disagreement. In fact, it made it worse because that's when the co-host really began claiming full sole ownership of the show. He said, my show, right? He tried to move the podcast to another network. Can you imagine? He asserted rights to the audience, to the revenue, to the business itself. Things like the RSS feed, the email accounts, the lists, all those kinds of things. Now, eventually, the founder had to lock him out of the podcast hosting platform and the email accounts, the social media, And instead of recording new episodes, now they're shaking fists and rattling sabers. Everyone's talking to lawyers. And for the better part of a year, ownership, control, revenue, intellectual property were the subjects we were debating. Now, eventually, we were able to settle the matter. And like many settlements, nobody walked away particularly happy. And the saddest part of the story is this: that dispute had almost nothing to do with the podcast itself. The show was excellent. The audience loved it. The business had real value. It wasn't about the content. The problem was that the business hadn't matured alongside the success of the content. Now, a straightforward co-host agreement at the beginning of the relationship, or well, that almost certainly would have prevented most of what followed. Or maybe forming an LLC and allocating ownership that way might have helped. But I don't tell you this story just to convince you to use a co-host agreement. That's just one example. There's a larger lesson here. As your creator business grows, your business infrastructure has to grow with it, especially if you're starting out with nothing. Every stage of success creates new questions. Who owns what? Who's responsible for what? How are the decisions made? How is money being divided? Who owns the intellectual property? What happens if someone leaves? These aren't questions that you want to answer during or after a disagreement has started. You want to answer them while everyone is still on the same page or close to it. That's one of the reasons I spend so much of my time helping creators put these things in place before the crisis, before there's a problem. Not because I enjoy paperwork, because I'd much rather help people keep building their businesses than spending a year helping them untangle one. And that brings us back to the title of this episode. Content isn't enough. Content got them the audience. It created the opportunity, the value. But content alone can't protect what they build. The business had to mature too in order for that to happen. So where do we go from here? Well, I would like to suggest one simple shift in the way you think about your work. Not every piece of content has to change the world. Not every episode has to go viral. Not every newsletter has to generate a flood of sales, but every piece of content should contribute to making your business stronger. And you need to think about the infrastructure while you're doing that. Very different perspective here. So before you hit record, before you hit publish, before you send that next email, ask yourself, how will this make my business stronger? And what can I do to preserve and protect that strength? Maybe this episode demonstrates your expertise or strengthens your relationship with your audience. Maybe it answers a question that you've been hearing over and over again. Maybe it becomes the basis for a conference presentation or a chapter of a book. Maybe it attracts a client that you've never met. Maybe it creates intellectual property that you could license later on. Maybe it becomes the first step in a much larger conversation with your community, your audience, your customers. You may not know exactly which opportunity will emerge, and that's okay. But the point is that you're creating with a larger purpose than just filling a content calendar. You are there to strengthen the business, creating with intention. I've come to believe that the most successful creator businesses don't think in terms of isolated pieces of content. They're thinking in terms of portfolios. Every podcast episode, YouTube video, article, every appearance on someone else's show, every workshop, every speaking engagement or interview adds something to the portfolio. Sometimes that's a new relationship, sometimes a stronger reputation or an intellectual property library of content. Maybe it's a process that you've documented. Sometimes it's just about trust. Over time, these things compound. That's why I don't think creator businesses should obsess over whether every individual piece of content is a home run. No, instead, ask whether it's contributing to something bigger. Is it making the business more valuable, more resilient, better known, better protected, more capable of serving the people that you're here to serve? If the answer is yes, then you're building something much more important than just another episode. You are building that enduring creator business. And that's really been the point of this entire series. In the first episode, I challenged you to recognize that you're building more than content. You're building business assets. In the next episode, second episode, we explored when those assets became and become a business. The answer, of course, is much earlier than most creators even realize. And today, I hope I've convinced you of one more thing, that as your content succeeds, your business has to grow and mature alongside it. It's not just about the legal documents, although those are important. It's not just about forming an LLC or registering a trademark or copyrights. Those things matter, absolutely, but they are part of something larger. They're part of a strategy of building a business that's prepared for the opportunities your content creates. I've seen way too many creators spend years becoming experts at creating content while giving very little thought to the business that owns the content. And then one day a sponsor calls or an investor comes in. Someone wants to buy or license the work or the show. A co-founder wants to leave, or a dispute arises, or an acquisition opportunity comes up. Suddenly they discover that they have a successful creator business, but that isn't ready for success. And I don't want that to happen to you. I would much rather see you build the foundation while you're building the business. Do it in stages, absolutely, one layer at a time, one decision, one agreement, one protected asset at a time. Because that's how strong creator businesses are built. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't happen just because something goes wrong, although often that's the impetus for things. But it's best when it happens steadily as the business grows. So here's a last thought I'd like to leave you with. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when someone looks at everything you've created, what is it you hope they see? A collection of content or a business built around ideas that matter? A business that continues serving people, creating opportunities, generating value, and reflecting the vision you had when you started. Those things don't happen automatically. They happen because someone decided that building the business deserved as much attention as building the content. That's really the difference. Great creator businesses don't simply publish consistently, they strengthen the business consistently. Every episode, every project, every opportunity. So that's the habit I hope you will begin to develop. Not just asking, what should I make this week? But asking, what can I make this week that will make my business stronger? How will I make my business stronger? If you make that one question part of your creative process, I believe you will begin making very different decisions, better decisions. Decisions that not only help you create better content, but build a stronger, healthier, more valuable business around it. If today's episode has challenged the way you think about your creator business, there's a next step for you. I'm developing something called the Creator Business Protection Blueprint. It is a practical framework. It's built to help you identify the business assets that you've already created and recognize where you are in your journey and understand the legal and business foundations you need to get into place as you keep growing. That'll position you for better success. You can learn more and join my early access list by going over to gordonfiremark.com/blueprint. And if your creator business has reached the point where you're dealing with partners, contractors, sponsorships, licensing, or intellectual property questions, you don't have to navigate those issues alone. That's what I'm here for. You can find out more about me at gordonfiremark.com. And if you're ready to strengthen your legal foundation today with attorney-drafted agreements, releases, and templates that I built specifically for podcasters and creator businesses, head over to podcastlawforms.com. So, next week is a special milestone. It marks episode 200 of this podcast. Rather than looking backward, I want to look forward. After nearly 200 episodes of Legit Podcast Pro and more than 3 decades working with creators and media businesses, I've noticed that the businesses that thrive over the long term have some remarkable things in common. They're not always the biggest, not always the most famous, but they share some characteristics that make them more resilient, more valuable, and just better prepared for the future. So that's what we'll be talking about in episode number 200 next week. I hope you'll join me, but until then, keep creating, keep building, and remember, your content deserves a business that's every bit as strong as the ideas that you're sharing with the world. And with that, I'll sign off and say, see you next time.